fees. So I'm actually going to go through right now live how I would enter a new position in wrapped ETH USDC at the 0.05% fee tier on Uniswap on the base chain. So there's a couple of ways that you could enter. You could either enter this position directly through Uniswap, or you could enter, like I'm going to, through Aperture and zap in, or you could enter through Crystal. Now, Crystal charges the greatest amount of fees of the three. Aperture charges less, and Uniswap is the cheapest in terms of fees to enter. But I prefer Aperture. This is my preferred platform to enter and manage Uniswap concentrated liquidity positions. So the first thing that I had to do was prep some wrapped ETH. So you could enter if you zap in with either USDC or wrapped ETH. I happen to have 1.73 wrapped ETH here that I'm going to enter this position with. So I've already set up the pool the way that I want it. The last step I need to perform here is I need to set my range. So this is something that we help clients with in Fast Track. And there are different ways to go about setting ranges. What I like to do is use a short-term volatility metric to help me determine how wide or narrow I should set my range based on my goals for that specific position. So if I'm going to, if my goal is to recreate a position that is similar to wrapped ETH USDC on Aerodrome, where my goal is cash flow, I'm setting a very narrow range in here. This range is only 7% wide. So now why would I set a range so narrow over here in wrapped ETH USDC on Aerodrome? Well, I'm setting this range narrow like this because of the data that I'm receiving from MangoMoss. This is the Uniswap pool. So let me just go ahead and go back here, and I'm going to pull up instead wrapped ETH USDC on Aerodrome. And what we're looking for is we're looking for this average volatility figure at different points in time over different periods of time. So let me just hit refresh real quick so that I can get this to load. Now, MangoMoss is one of the tools that we use as a screener, and it works exceptionally well. So I need to use a couple of filters here to find that pool. So I'm going to filter first by chain. I'm going to filter by chain. I'm going to select base. I'm looking for a base pool. And then I'm looking for that Aerodrome position. And I'm looking for wrapped ETH USDC. So here we go. Here it is. I'm going to add this to my favorites right here, and then I'm going to click through. It's by default going to bring me to 1 week's worth of data on these charts. And notice the average volatility figure over the last week is very low. That's not necessarily valuable to me because I plan to stay in this position for much longer than 1 week. So I need a little bit more data to determine the average volatility of ETH. So I'm going to go and take a look at 2 weeks. Okay, 2 weeks, 4.74%. And 3 weeks, 6%. And 1 month, 5.5%. So I'm going to use the largest average volatility figure over the last month, which is at 3 weeks, 6%. Now, there's another way that we could get an average volatility figure here, and we could do that over on TradingView. Just want to make sure, Lucas, Reed, you guys can see my TradingView screen here.
Copy that.
Just copy, awesome. Yeah. Okay, so over here in TradingView, what I want to do is I want to first zoom out to a daily. And on a daily time frame, I want to use an average true range. This ATR is going to help me to determine how wide I could set my range based on ATR, which is a short-term volatility metric here. Now I'm going to use a price range tool and measure from the spot price up to the top of the ATR, and then from the spot price down to the bottom. So this ATR metric is giving me, plus and minus 8% or so. I want to set my range a little bit more narrow. I want it to be just a touch wider than the average volatility metric over here on MangoMoss. I prefer this volatility metric. And remember, my goal for this specific position is cash flow. That's why I'm setting my range so narrow in here. Now, I want to recreate this Aerodrome wrapped ETH USDC position, but I want to do it on Uniswap. And I'm going to do that through Aperture here. So back to Aperture. Now that I know, okay, the ATR of ETH is maybe plus and minus 8%. The average volatility metric for ETH USDC is maybe close to 6 or 7%. So I want to set a range in here that is going to be just a little bit wider than the average volatility metric over there on MangoMoss. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to set my range to plus and minus 4% wide. Now this is based on my goal. My goal is to generate free cash flow while not having to rebalance my position too often. And so that's why I'm using that volatility metric to help me set a range. So if I know that the average volatility of ETH is 6 or 7% over the last month, if I set my range slightly wider than that, then I shouldn't have to rebalance too often. And that's my goal, a narrow range that doesn't need to be rebalanced too often so that I can generate the most in free cash flow, in fees in this case. So now that I've appropriately set my range based on my goal, then I'm going to deploy this maximum amount of wrapped ETH that I have in my wallet, and I'm deploying from my hardware device. I'm deploying from my Trezor. So that's another important consideration here. I've got this order routing. This looks good. I'm going to first approve. Now I'm using Rabby wallet, and I know that a lot of guys and gals in Fast Track like Rabby. This is my preferred EVM chain wallet. When I click to begin signing, it's going to bring me to Trezor Connect. I'm going to sign these transactions. First, I need to just input my PIN one more time to open up my Trezor. And once I enter this PIN, then I'm going to click enter and start signing these transactions. And remember, this range is based on my goal for this position. So you could set a range for a different goal, and I want to talk about that in just a moment after I open this position. Okay, so I approve the spending cap. Now I'm going to open the position. This all looks good, 1.733 ETH. Looks good to me. I'm happy with this. I'm going to confirm open, and then I'm going to sign this, and in just a moment, I will have a new wrapped ETH USDC position on Uniswap on the base chain at the 0.05% fee tier with a plus and minus 4% wide range. Okay, success. So now in a moment, there's my new position. Now, I need to keep this position in range. And to do that, I want to use some of the automation tools over here in Aperture to help me keep my new position always in range. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click through, and then I'm going to use the recurring rebalance function in Aperture to set up recurring rebalance logic to keep my position always in range. Now, we like to use the token ratio for the trigger rather than the token price. So I'm just going to click right here for token ratio. And the important thing here is not so much the asset that you're selecting, but the ratio. So for me, I want to recreate the auto rebalance in VFAT. I want these to be very, very similar positions, that Aerodrome VFAT position and this Uniswap Aperture position. I want them to be very, very similar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my ratio below 0% and my ratio above 100%. Now, what does this mean? What it means is that the moment I go out of range, it's going to trigger a rebalance unless I give it a time buffer. Now, I'm going to give it a time buffer, but a very short one, and I'll show that in just a moment. So the next step here is I need to tell Aperture, okay, when a rebalance is triggered, to what range do I rebalance the position back to? And I can set that here using the percentage terms. Now, during our mastermind call earlier today, Lucas and Reed, we were talking about how to use the ratio rebalance range and tick spacing to more appropriately rebalance positions based on our market biases, or to realize less impermanent loss using this ratio rebalance. but I'm going to stick with percentages for now just to keep things a little bit more straightforward. And I like to rebalance my positions back to a range of the same width that I entered the position with in the first place. So I'm going to just change this to plus and minus 4% because I entered this position with a plus and minus 4% wide range in the first place. So 4.0, -4, and +4, like so. And then I'm going to give it a little bit of a time buffer. So this is time weighted average price, and I want to give it just a 5-minute time buffer. So that's going to be 0.08. I want this position to always be in range, earning me fees. I want my positions to always be working for me. So now all I have to do is save the trigger settings, and just like that, I'm happy. So the last step here is to give it a gas fee ceiling. Now, I prefer to set my gas fee ceiling in dollars rather than in percentage terms. And since we're operating here on base, gas is super cheap, but I want to give it way, way more in a gas fee ceiling than it will ever spend. So this is saying to Aperture that it can spend up to $1. I have never seen a transaction on base cost anywhere near to this. So I'm happy with that. And then the last step for me is I just want to turn down my slippage. I don't want to be paying up in slippage for these transactions. So I'm actually going to go 0.5%. And then I'm going to apply this slippage setting to all transactions. And just like that, I have all of my settings set properly based on my goals for this position. The last thing I need to do here is enable the authorized operator. Now this will allow Aperture to manage my position on my behalf. So I'm going to sign this transaction using my Trezor. I like physically signing transactions with the physical buttons that I have on my Trezor Safe 3. That's the model Trezor that I'm using here. So I just signed the AO, and now I need to click one more time to create the strategy. So I'm just going to create the strategy and sign this message here. And I'm going to sign this using my Trezor. And then once I've signed this, I will have successfully set up my recurring rebalance strategy with this logic up top. And in just a moment, there we go, success. So now I've turned on that recurring rebalance. And to view that recurring rebalance strategy, I'm just waiting for this to load here. I probably just need to refresh it so that it shows up, show all chains. And then I'm looking for a little icon here. There it is. So there's the recurring rebalance icon. And if I click through to the position, I can actually see my recurring rebalance strategy here. So as rebalances occur, I'll be able to see the accrued fees that are compounded back into the position over here. So if you're ever wondering, what happened to your fees during a rebalance when you have the recurring rebalance turned on Aperture, well, your fees are unclaimed fees during a recurring rebalance are compounded back into the position over here on Aperture. So what I've done is I've mimicked VFAT using Aperture. I've mimicked VFAT's automated rebalance tool over here on Uniswap through Aperture. So I've got two very similar positions